Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the penultimate session of our Pirkei Avot class and of Beth Lita Online. Barring any other future global health catastrophes, poo poo poo. We will be thinking, as the class is wrapping up, we've been focusing our attention on what it is we can take with us, once this kind of specific structure of like a weekly class, passes. So today we're actually going to be starting a two-part series. We'll be continuing into next week because I'm pretty sure the source sheet I did is way too long to do in one session. And we're going to be focusing on actually how it is that we're able to craft our own learning experiences, not just the frontal experience of a teacher, but rather actually how we can go out and find learning experiences that are more peer-based, to find partners in learning, what we call chavrusas, and even empower ourselves to find our own teachers as well in life. So don't leave me behind, please. I hope we have many opportunities to learn together over the coming years. But also, I want to make sure that this type of learning that we do is always empowering, that it's charging you, whether in the class right now live or on the other side of the YouTube screen or the podcast earphone, to take Torah that we've been doing and to empower you to take it and move forward with it yourself. So today we're going to be focusing on Mishnah from Pirkei Avos that we actually saw before, but we're going to be focusing on a different part of it that listed the many ways in which one acquires Torah learning. But this time we're going to be focusing not specifically on our character traits, but actually on behaviors and on contexts that support what it means to learn Torah. So let's get cracking. I'm going to share screen. There we go. Okay, everyone see that okay? Great. So we'll be the two kind of axes of relationship, of learning relationship, we'll be looking at will be that of the peer or the friend, and that of the teacher. So we will end actually gesturing to next week, looking at a famous Mishnah in which it instructs us how to acquire those relationships. But first, we're going to be looking at these lists of behaviors and contexts. So, Torah nikneit be'arba'a u'shmona dvarim. Torah is acquired, so pay attention to that language there, through 48 different ways, or 48 different things. Ve'elu hein, ... it's very long. B'shimush chachamim, one of the ways you acquire Torah is through serving sages, i.e. attending to your teachers. Now, shimush chachamim is a technical phrase in rabbinic culture that refers to the ways in which a disciple is supposed to take care of the master's needs, right? It is, a very robust and even intimate relationship between a master and disciple. It's worth noting that, especially if we go back to the original context of the rabbinic movement, right, in Greco-Roman Palestine and in Babylonia, that to be a student of a rabbi or to be a Talmid Chacham is to become a member of a certain kind of group. You're initiated into what it means to be part of that group. It's not just like going to a class. The modern university, even though it's originally modeled on like monasteries and the like, or scholastic institutions like within an ecumenical framework, i.e. like where like priests and other clergy members were trained, right, in Christian Europe in the medieval period. But nowadays, the modern university is, I would say, consumerist, right? That students are seen as consumers. They're seen as paying to play, right? You're paying lots of money often to get certain benefits from it, and that's in some ways, it makes sense because it is important to be aware of the costs that go into education. But also what's lost is the enchantment of what that student-teacher relationship was like. That there was a sense of guidance, that there was a sense of a real, lasting relationship that lasted just beyond the class that you were doing together or the learning that you were doing together. It wasn't just something that you just kind of checked a box, but rather it was you were being initiated in a certain kind of living, a way of living, a lifestyle. So Shimush Chachamim is an aspect of that. It kind of strikes the modern era strange, right? That a student would be, if it's maybe even seem like exploitative or something like that, or maybe even potentially open to some kind of inappropriate relationship. But in the structure of this, all of this is theoretically guarded against. The point of it rather is that you are learning from a teacher not just the information they give you, but also you are exhibiting a certain kind of way to behave in relation to that. You are grateful, and in that way you are providing services in kind, in a way, and so it equalizes it because they need you like you need them. But, that being said, if anyone wants to be doing my laundry or vacuuming my living room or what have you, just feel free to DM me and we can set up a time. So we'll look further into what Shimush Chachamim means. But one of the things I want you to take away from that is that learning is not just information-based. It's not just happening in a class, but rather it's something that's happening in interpersonal encounters through your, in a way, making yourself available in other aspects of life. That learning happens beyond just the classroom. So that's one way Torah is acquired. A second way Torah is acquired is called B'dikduk Chaverim, in paying close attention, in kind of inspecting what it is your classmates, right, your fellow students, your peers are saying. We'll get further into what that means. And further, B'pilpul HaTalmidim, and lastly, in fine argumentation with disciples. Pilpul, right, is related to the Hebrew word pilpel, right, between pepper, and pilpula charifta, hot peppers, but hot spiciness is a kind of a technical term you find in Talmudic learning that refers to very fine kinds of argumentation, really rigorous kind of reasoning. It's a specific kind of Talmudic learning that was especially practiced in the early modern period in the yeshiva, but it has its roots here too. That Talmidim, students, are really, like putting their nose to the grindstone and really trying to work something out. And we'll look into that as well. And then finally, in this kind of set, it says B'yishuv, which means in settlement. Many commentators see it as like mental quietude, like what it means to have a sense of peace. But I also think Yishuv here refers to what it means to be settled in where you're learning, like i.e. the attending to the context, that you're in it for the long haul, you're part of an institution, you're part of a community, you're part of a cohort, you're part of a group, you're part of the student-teacher relationship. It's not just, again, services rendered, right? You're not just in there to get certain certification or a credential or something like that, but rather you're in it because you are joining something and you want to stay in it and contribute to it. That's where we're going to really focus our attention, but I also want to keep on going for the final part of it too. I want to review that with you as well. So Shoel Umeshiv, learning Torah is acquired through asking questions and then also responding to questions. Shomea Umosif, hearing questions or hearing kind of a challenge, something like that, and then adding to it, whether adding to the challenge or even perhaps furthering what it is that you're learning. What I find so interesting about this is that, you'd think that the ancient model of this, master and disciple is that the disciple is just supposed to be, a funnel in which the master just, gives you all the information, the wisdom, crams it in your head. But the Torah, the model of learning Torah in the earliest evidence that we have, the beginning of the rabbinic movement, the Mishnah, right, their first major text, already sees that learning dynamics are just that, dynamic. They grow, they change. They're about shakla vitaria, right, which is Aramaic for give and take. Like shakla vitaria, that's what the Talmud is based on. The Talmudic relationships are often called bare plugta, children of argument, i.e. your chavrusa, right, the person that you learn with is the person you argue with. Right? It's not the person the primary relationship in some way is furthering discourse through engagement, right? Furthering Torah through your, right, the student's commitment and your insights and your ideas and your challenges and your kashyas, right? All of that goes into learning. It's not The quietude of learning isn't just sitting down and shutting up. It's very it's very Jewish listening, or what's called by linguists active listening, right? It's involved listening. It's not just, yes, I heard you. It's, oh yeah, and that's because, oh yeah, no, that makes sense because, right? It is a way of engaging and participating in what's going on. And it's a balance, because it's a balance between contributing, right, what your unique insights are, and also the shimush chachamim, right, attending to the teacher, realizing that they have a lot that they have to offer. They've been through the ringer. They've been around the block. That's why you're here, right, to learn from somebody who's already gone on their journey and wants to now bring you on yours. Okay. Halomed almanat lilamed, one who studies in order to teach, right? A teacher what began as a student. Right, there's no teacher that was not a student first. Right, every student is also in some way bound up with potentially being a teacher, or maybe already being a teacher. We'll see how that plays out. Halomed almanat la'asot, one who learns in order to practice, one who learns in order to apply. Right, it's not just theoretical. Right, Torah learning happens. Torah learning is activated truly when it's not just seen as something to know, but rather something that you embody. Something you practice, something you manifest in the world. Hamachkim et rabo, one who makes your teacher, your master, wiser. I want to pause on that. What do you think that means? One who makes one's teacher wiser.
By questioning them, and maybe even bringing up a chidush, the teacher also learns from you. Maybe you have a question that they never thought of, and it gives them a chance to really think about it more.
Great. That's a great reading of that. Other ideas? What does it mean to make your teacher wiser?
I mean, I think it's pretty similar to what Lauren was just saying, but like to push them to explain it, like I still don't get it. Like, can you explain it some more? Like, and just keep pushing them, and then they have to think about it more and stuff. So.
Right. So one might be like asking questions in terms of like kind of critiquing or pointing out things. Another one is that a teacher learns more about the subject because they need to learn how to communicate it to somebody else. Right, so when somebody says, actually, it's, these are what I'm still having trouble with, or this is what I don't understand yet, it actually makes the teacher have to go back to the material, look at it again, turn it around, and be able then to try to represent it in a way that is communicable. Yeah, Alan?
I guess it's tagging on to what you just said, but in terms of preparing and learning to be able to teach, you need to maybe dig deeper and see things a different way, or learn new information in your preparation.
Yeah. I mean, I can say firsthand that preparing for these classes, I've learned Pirkei Avot, many, many times. So preparing for these classes, if only just, making me go through all the commentaries, making me look at, but even just thinking about not just what does this mean in its own right, but what does this mean in terms of the conversation I'm trying to start? Or what does it mean in terms of the provocation I'm trying to initiate, right? Or or to put these texts in conversation with each other, what new things come out of that. So the very act of teaching actually is also in that way an act of learning. So being engaged in that teaching or learning relationship is then the wisening, right? Is the making more wisdom, because it forces everybody, in a sense, to look at things new, to bring new things to bear, not just to know it for one's own terms, but be able actually to make it make sense in other people's terms. You learn a new vantage point when you need to teach somebody else, because you're not teaching yourself. You're trying to communicate something you think, or you think you can defend, to someone else who has a different experience than you, comes from a different vantage point, has a different perspective, whatever. So all teaching in that way needs to be deeply empathic, because the point of teaching is to be able to reach people who are different. And then also, all learning is also empathic, because you need to be open to what it means to learn from somebody, which is, requires a certain amount of humbling, and also a willingness to trust the teacher and to also try to see things from their perspective as well. Weiter, v'mechavein et shmuato, one who is exact is the translation that I received, but I think maybe mechavein, one is intentional, right? In what one is. And shmua is a technical term in rabbinic literature. It means a tradition, because learning, right? The words for learning in rabbinic Hebrew always have to do with hearing, shmaita. So a shmua is not just like something you heard, but rather something you have taken in, and something that you are going to want to make sure to, I think I was saying, to be exact in, because what you've learned from somebody, you have a responsibility, if you say something in their name, to get it right, to be accurate, because you are, in a way, representing what they're saying. But also, in terms of what it means to say something that someone else is going to hear, that one needs to be intentional and thoughtful in the words that one chooses. And then finally, as I just kind of hinted at, Omer Devar B'Shem Omro, right? Famously, like one of the pillars of rabbinic ethics is that you always need to cite your sources. I don't just think it's about like glory or copyright or whatever, but really because what we've just actually been gesturing to this whole time, that learning is a social endeavor, and learning inculcates a practice of gratitude, because what one knows is always in some way due to or indebted to who you have learned from and whom you have learned with. And thus, because of that, we're all embedded and interconnected, right, in this web. Famously, I don't know. What's the word in Hebrew for a tractate of Talmud, right? Tractate is Latin, tractatus, and it means a document, that's dealing with a certain topic. But anyone who's learned Talmud knows that no Talmud document is really dealing with a certain topic. That's a very European word, and it's not accurate to what our term for it is. Our term for a tractate of Talmud is Masechet. Masechet, or Masechta in Aramaic, means a woven garment. Right? Because a Talmudic text is woven together from all of these different shmuas, right? All of these different traditions that people have heard, and then tried to represent accurately in the name of the person they heard it from. And then these are then woven together by the editors of the text. But also, I think, Masechta, a woven garment, because also we are in this web. We are in this fabric together, this texture, text and texture. Right? We are in this garment together, woven together through these lines of learning, these relationships. Learning is a social endeavor. All of our own insights are made of what we've learned from others, and then also what we've contributed to that ourselves. All right, all innovation in Torah is, on one hand, modesty and humility, gratitude for what it is we've learned, and also daring innovation in terms of furthering that, heightening it, adding what no one else has added before. It's both of those, but you can't have one without the other. And the rabbis even go far to say that anyone who says something in the name of the one from whom they learned it brings redemption to the world. Mevi geula le'olam. And Esther, Queen Esther, is the model for this, because when she reports to the king in chapter 2 of the Megillah, she reports it in the name of Mordechai. So Esther is our Talmid Chacham, right? She is our disciple of the wise. She is a wise disciple. And she's exhibiting that cooperation, that dialectic between what it is she's daring to do, right, by going before the king, by doing what no one else has done, but also recognizing what it is that she's gained from others. Okay. So here I want to take a pause, and I want to go back to these three dynamics that we mentioned before, and we'll look at what different commentators think that they mean. But I also want to make sure we all have we have space to kind of figure out what they mean for ourselves too, because even though, again, something like, especially I would say Shimush Chachami might be a little bit hard for the kind of modern teacher-student relationship. I don't want to say that like without recognizing, examples that we've seen of ways in which teachers have used their power and their influence in inappropriate and unethical ways, and that is absolutely against Torah. I think what's being referenced here in Pirkei Avot is what a healthy relationship between a teacher and a student could look like, and the way in which we can have structure and boundaries and safe concerns, or safe regulations around what it means to actually have that kind of depth, and even like intimacy, but intimacy without sacrificing safety. So let's look at what the Yachin says about Shimush Chachamim. He says, She'al yedei sheyeh tamid saviv lahem, ksheyishamesh lahem, yilmad mima'asehem harbei, mehalacha l'maisa. Says, because, again, the structure of this relationship is that you're going to be around them all the time, and you're going to be taking care of, like fulfilling your studently duties, in some ways, serving at the in the household of the teacher. One will learn from their behavior. One will learn a lot from their behavior. Specifically, mehalacha l'maisa, seeing the way in which they practice Torah, practically, right? Halacha l'maisa, not just like, pause. Well, I guess we'll finish it. It's a short thing. Cham Ramzal, like they say in the Talmud, Gedola Shimusha Shel Torah Yoter Me Limuda, right? That serving Torah is greater than learning it. Okay, so before I add my glosses and my, gobbledygook, how do you take this? Effectively saying, doing chores for your teachers is great, and it's so great, it's even better than going to class. Why? Because you'll be around them and you'll be learning a lot from the way that they act. Do you think this is bunk? Do you think this is just like a scam to get your laundry done by your students?
It's a double-edged sword. If
Mhm.
I've had that teachers, I've noticed rabbis who are really wonderful exemplars of what it means to be a Torah Jew. But you can also be like, you could be around the person and see that the person is abusive to his wife, like yells at her, treats her like a slave, isn't particularly kind to his kids. And if you see that can actually be very off-putting. Like, you have to realize that, the person may be a brilliant scholar, but the menschlichkeit is lost. So I think it's a double-edged being around the teacher all the time. It's great if the person is somebody who's really, really an exemplary human being.
Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, Lauren, thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate that comment. And I think it's really important. I think an ethic that we've tried to craft in this class is Torah with honesty, right? And not to just give people a rosy lensed view, because I don't think that's ever sustainable. Because what happens when the rubber hits the road, and then you see, and your faith gets broken when someone you're expecting to, put all your trust in, ends up disappointing you in that kind of way. So I think you're absolutely right to note that. I think you're, in a way, the double-edged sword is, maybe in a way the point, because if it's the case, think of it this way, if it's the case that the disciple is going to be around the teacher, and you're going to be watching their every move, because they're expecting to learn from it. Thus, like Hegel writes about, the dialectic of the master and the slave, right? On one hand, the master obviously enslaves the slave, right? The master tells the slave what to do, the slave does the thing. But on the other hand, says Hegel, the slave enslaves the master, because the master is trapped in the role of the master and has to do these things to direct into, obviously this is an unethical relationship, but just bracketing that for a moment. Right? The master's freedom is also conditioned because the master has to fulfill this role. So, if the disciple is around the master all the time, watching their every move because they're expecting to learn from it. That actually, in a way, holds the master up to a certain kind of standard that maybe they wouldn't maybe live up to otherwise. That they know that they're being watched. They know that they're being learned from. They know that they're not just living in their home, but they're serving as an exemplum. And because of that, then, they don't have the freedom to slip up. They don't have the freedom to, be short with their, with their children, or to be callous with their spouse, or what have you. And the other side of that too, though, is that, let's say it is the, and if it is the case, then that the teacher is unethical, is not, does not have a fit character, even abusive, then, that also is a certain kind of learning that the disciple does to see, what Torah doesn't look like, or what it can't look like in terms of witnessing bad behavior. Now, it doesn't excuse the bad behavior, obviously. And that's why what, you see, like, regimes of power, right? Keep people quiet, or what have you. It needs to be a relationship based in trust, and the trust needs to go both ways. On one hand, right, we have the student doing a bunch of, services for the sake of their teacher. But on the other hand, the teacher is letting them in, right, letting them into the house. So that needs to be in some way, a relationship based in trust, otherwise the whole thing falls apart. And I think we're missing the ways in which that trust is justified and that trust is protected. We can't be naive and we can't be thoughtless or without intention when it comes to this. But what we have here, I think, is an ideal, and the ideal is that Torah is not just informational. Torah is about watching the way the person you're learning from behaves. Because it's not just theoretical. It's not just the thing that they studied, in the archives, and they are experts in this, this 3-year period in the, in French early modern history. But rather, this is about living a life. And Torah is meaningless. Learning Torah is meaningless unless the result of it is that it structures, informs, and even transforms your life. Torah needs to be practiced, or else it's useless. So when it says halacha l'maisa, sure, I guess maybe it means like, oh, how does my rabbi make tea on Shabbos? But I think like more to the point, more substantively, it means how do they apply and manifest Torah in the world? But back to, back to this kind of reasonable statement, I was actually really bowled over to see this. The Yachin, I think, in some way, Lauren, intuits exactly, I think, the point that you were gesturing to. Because he says, one of the phrases I didn't get into, I decided not to include, but it says one of the ways you acquire Torah is through emunas chachamim, faith in the sages. And the Yachin jumps in real quick and says, she'eno ma'amin l'chol davar sheshomea. That doesn't mean that you're supposed to believe every single thing you hear from them, that you learn from them. Dezeo midas pesi ya'amin l'chol davar. Because that is the quality, the characteristic of foolishness, to uncritically believe anything that you hear. Aval ya'amin l'chachamim b'chochmas haTorah. I think it really, in a way, he means believe in your teachers. Right? I.e., the learning relationship needs to be based in trust. That they are trying. They're trying to instruct. They're trying to guide. They're trying to communicate something to the best of their ability. They're trying to reach you. But where ultimately is the filter, right? Where is the criterion for what it means for what you believe? It lies in you. Right? The Yachin says, that doesn't mean just swallow it all like a sponge. Or like a sponge, you take it all in, but then like a sponge, you wring it out. Right? It has to be in some way a critical relationship in which, as much as the teacher is giving over to the disciple, the student is also empowered in terms of what it means to craft their own learning, to receive and also to select, to perceive, not just receive. Right? To discern. not just to absorb. Is it part of it? I think the Yachin is saying, like you might hear something, it doesn't make sense to you. You have to have faith that that like your teacher is getting at something that maybe you just don't understand yet. Right, that's part of it. I think in some ways, this moment might be missing that kind of patience. That because something doesn't make sense to you means it doesn't make sense. But Yachin is saying again, if Torah is based in trust, then you need to trust that, and have like the humility to believe that maybe there's something you just don't understand yet. So you trust and believe that it's going to come to you, or that they will communicate it to you in a way that will make sense to you eventually, etc., etc. But he doesn't, that's not the whole point. The first point of it is saying something a little bit different. Not just if you don't get it, something's, you're not there yet. But also, sometimes you don't accept it because doesn't seem right to you. There can't be a teacher-student relationship in which there's not room for critical reactions to the student's own personality, the student's own individuality. Right? The teacher is there to help the student become themselves, not to become a clone of the teacher. And if that gets missing, right, if the teacher sees the relationship as one that they can exploit, one they have license to use, then something's fundamentally broken, and that responsibility is entirely in the teacher. The teacher-student relationship is healthy when there is room for healthy faith. To believe in somebody requires trust, but trust goes both ways. It's not that I demand trust from you. Teacher demands trust from disciple, and if you dare to question me, then you're out. That's a cult. That's not a yeshiva. A healthy teacher-student relationship has room for healthy trust, healthy faith, because there's room for questions, doubts, pushback, critique, even criticism. Otherwise, how are we supposed to have all of the things that we just talked about here, in which it's not just what the teacher is giving forth, but what room there is for the student to co-create, to co-contribute, to craft what's happening in the learning space? It needs to be dialogical, which means that there needs to be room for the student to be able to push back, to ask questions, even to challenge. So on one hand, we have shimush chachamim, right? To humble yourself, to serve the teacher because you're so grateful to have the honor and the privilege to be in this relationship, to give them honor and respect in that kind of way. But that is only possible when that honor and respect is exhibited by the teacher as well to the student. When they are given the respect to have room for their own individual, personal subjectivity, to be not just not for just to exist, but to be actually cultivated, to be nourished, and to be supported. Right, take a pause. So that's the shimush / emunas chachamim element. Reactions or questions, comments. Okay. Well, if anything else comes to mind, please don't hesitate. Move now to a different commentary, the lechem shemayim, bread me heaven, heaven's bread. And now we're going to be looking at the peer relationship. So first we were looking at the relationship between the teacher and student, or the master and disciple. That's what we'd say a vertical relationship, right? Teacher, student, right? Student serves the teacher. Obviously, it's a hierarchy. But now we're talking about a peer relationship, a horizontal relationship, right? A chavrusa, or chaverim. Friends. There's a whole underthought category of a theory of friendship. Not just chavrusa, but really friendship in its like robust sense that you can find from rabbinic texts. That's really been underappreciated and underlooked at one of these days. But we can start digging into it now. So dikduk chaverim, critical give and take with friends, or I would say dikduk, it's the same word. I mean, it's grammar in Hebrew. I think in this case, really paying attention to what it is that your friend says, really involving yourself in it. Okay? All right, Kamosha Kosov, as it's written, Ume chavirai yoser me rabbaisai. And from my friends, I have learned even more than my teachers. We're going to look at that text further on. It's from the Gemara, from Masechet Ta'anit. There's a few texts we'll be looking at, in the next 2 weeks, next 2 sessions. But the idea is, I've learned much from my teachers, but I've learned from my friends even more than from my teachers. And then finally, we'll see the third one. You can probably intuit what it's going to say. V'zelafi shechavero libo gasbo. Why is it, the Lechem Shemayim is asking implicitly, that you would learn more from your peer than you would from your teacher? The person whose job it is to teach you things. Right? It seems like, wait a second. If I'm supposed to be like, shining my teacher's shoes and stuff because I owe them so much, because they're teaching me so much cool stuff, then how is it, it seems like, why do I even go to school? Why even have teachers? Why not just have, like reading groups and study groups and book clubs and stuff? Now, obviously the role of the teacher is important. Don't you forget it. But he's saying that there's something unique about the peer relationship that engenders even more learning to happen. And I think this, in a way, is proof in the pudding in terms of what I hope these sources are gesturing to, is that learning is not merely reception. It's not just about what you get from a teacher in a class. Learning is a gerund. It is a noun. It is an action verb noun. Learning. It's not just something that happens. It's something you do. It's something you engage in. It's something that you further. The class is dead, in a sense, if it only exists in the classroom. Torah is alive because it's a Eitz Chaim Machazikim Ba. It's a tree of life to those who are grasping for it. It branches and flowers and blossoms. It spreads. It spreads above you through a canopy, and it spreads below you through the roots. It nourishes you as it takes you through class into life. Eitz Chaim Hi. It's a tree of life. Right? Learning is something that happens in your life, not just something that happens in your class. Learning something that you are doing, not the teacher is doing to you. It's not teaching, it's learning. So, why is it then that you can learn more from your peers, or through your peers, with your peers, than you do from your teacher? Because, it says, your friend's heart is expansive with you. Now, I think that means, friends like each other. But it also means gas, like a behemoth gasa, right, versus a behemoth daka. Behemoth daka is like a little animal. A behemoth gasa, it's like a cow. Cows are big. Usually you see it in concept of tefillin, right? People got little tefillin or big tefillin. Big tefillin is from behemoth gasa, from a big old thick animal. A friend's heart is thick with you. It's big with you. It makes room for you. It's expansive. There's space for you. A friend shelters you. A friend cradles you. A friend holds you. A friend holds you in their heart because there's room for you. Right? A teacher is teaching a whole bunch of disciples. Right? And it is as beautiful it is and intimate as it is a professional relationship. It's your job. But a friend, even if it is like a coworker or something like that, friendship is something that stands on its own. It's born from a context, but it's about two people. It's nothing more, nothing less than two people. So a friend's heart makes room for you. It's expansive with you. It's big with you. Lachein midaktikim ze im ze. And because of that, you feel empowered and encouraged to really pay attention to each other. Yoter b'havanat talmudam. Even more in a way than understanding their insights. Mimashi daktikui marav. Right? You pay more attention to trying to understand what it is your friend says, even more than you try to pay attention to figure out what your teacher said. What a twist! You got to give it up to Judaism, to Rabbinic Judaism. That it's a religion in which we're willing to undermine our own position for the sake of the project. Right? This rabbi is saying, you know what's better than rabbis? Your friends. And you should pay attention to them more than you pay attention to me. And you will naturally, in a sense, because you feel safer with them. Because you feel loved and cherished by them. I hope it's the case that people feel safe and encouraged by me, but correctly, there is a line between a teacher and a student, and there needs to be, or else again, there's a real potential for what the relationship shouldn't be. The boundaries are essential to make sure it can go as far as they can go, safely and with care for everybody's personal needs. But a friend, it's not professional. A friend doesn't have those same kinds of inherent differences, inherent limitations, or distances. You can go further with a friend because you're on the same level. And thus, you're more invested in each other because you're allies, you're comrades. You want each other's success. You're teammates. Thus, you really try to give your teacher, your friend, the attention that they deserve. Because you want to help and make sure, because you care about what it is that they have to say, and you want to make sure you get it and you're on board. Why is it? I mean, the Lechem Shemayim is very insightful. Why is it that this is even more, it just goes even farther, it goes even deeper than what you might do with your teacher? You're scared of your teacher. I mean, think of like old schoolhouses, the rulers and the discipline, not like today's much more gentle pedagogical models. So on one hand, sure, they mete out discipline too. But just, again, the nature of the relationship, right? You want to impress your teacher. You're nervous around them. You're anxious around them. You don't want to be judged. You don't want to be assessed the wrong way. Because of that, there's going to be an inherent blockage. You won't be able to go farther. Right? You won't be able to go farther because you won't feel empowered to. You won't feel like you have permission to. But with a friend, you don't need to be scared of a friend. Lechem Shemayim is saying, what an opportunity you have that you're surrounded by people you can go far with. There's a limit to what you're willing to do because you don't want to put your position, your reputation, whatever, at risk with a teacher. But with a student, a fellow student, a comrade, an ally, a peer, a friend, you're in it together. You're in the thick together. You can get as deep as you want to because you know that you're in that same you're committed to the same mission, same project. So you're anxious about your teacher, and because of that, you're going to rush to learn it. Marahate Gemarahi. You're going to be really just kind of trying to impress your teacher. And then you're going to try to get back into the classroom to show off or whatever. But it means you're going to be sacrificing depth because of breadth. But with your friends, nochim, and we're going to see that word pop up later. I want you to remember that word nochim, like menucha. You're at peace with your friends. They're gentle with you. They love you. Ein kavanasam rak l'hasiga emes bilvad. With your friends, all they want is to know what you're trying to say. They believe in you. They like you. They want the best for you. A peer relationship is a project of cooperation. And it's one that's built out of that sense of feeling an affiliation, right? That I feel loyal to you, I care about you, I'm connected to you. And that breeds a sense of excitement, and commitment. Because I want to get as much as I can from you. And I want you to go as far as you can go. I want us to dare more when it comes to what it is that our relations can be. To see each other as, not just, I think, people we need to manage. This is a time of great anxiety, especially social anxiety. And I'm not judging anyone who has it. I have a ton of it. But it makes sense to be anxious with your teacher because they're, fine, they're assessing you, they're judging you. It's like your boss. Ugh. But I think we owe ourselves a world in which we are inspired by our friends. We're impassioned because of our friends. We're committed to our friends, and they're committed to us. Because we're part of each other. We're in it together. Has anyone had like a peer relationship like this, that this kind of makes sense? Or something to think about?
Yeah, sure. I mean,
Yeah. Maybe I'm being off. Yeah, Susie?
no, I said, yeah, sure. Like when during the Kabbalah series, sometimes there's not a lot of time to talk or ask questions. And so then after the class ended, Naomi and I would call each other every night and be like, blah, 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 and like talk about everything and go through it all and come up with questions to send for the Sunday question period and stuff. So yeah, so it makes like total sense.
That's awesome. That makes me so happy to hear. I couldn't ask for anything more. All right, so let's come to my. So the last element is, you might not have expected it in a sense, but we start from the vertical relationship of the teacher and student. And then we have the horizontal relationship of the two peers, the chaverim, the friends, the colleagues. And then finally, actually, we have pilpul talmudim, fine argumentation with fellow students. I.e., that it's vertical again, but now you're on top. You've gone through your course, you've gotten your whatever, your certification, you're not learning you're not student anymore, you're the teacher. But if you don't realize that learning continues while you're teaching, you've missed the greatest point of all. That the most you learn, says the Talmud. Right? I learned much from my teachers. I learned more from my friends than I did from my teachers. But the most I learned from my students. And like we were getting at before, in terms of the questions that they make you ask, the ways of trying to present something to people who are fresh to it, new perspectives that they offer. Teaching something is the greatest opportunity to learn, because you now have so many more insights and perspectives that you're being exposed to, not just from the books, the people on the, the boys in the back, the people on the page, but from people learning it, bringing their Torah from their lives, and helping you see things you hadn't seen before. It says, Ki ha-talmidim mitoch she'enan shleimim b'chochma adayin. Students, because they are not yet complete, right, in their wisdom, i.e., they're still learning, right? They're still in process. They're still growing. V'gam kidei laharos kocham shegam lehem levav ozen mileim tzivcha. I love that. And also because they want to show that they have what the people should be paying attention to too. Right? There's like a zeal and a passion when you're a student, when you're like really in it. When you're really in it. That you want to show that you're in it, right? That you've got something. Hey, mefalfalin beina emes bein sheker v'shibush. Right? A student is impassioned. Right? To really get into the nitty-gritty. And to try to discern between what's right and what's a mistake and what's wrong. Those are, I think, 3 different categories. What's true, what's false, and what's an error. Error doesn't mean like just a mistake. It means like, what if there was actually like a correction to the text that needs to be made? right? Only students, in a way, because they are not just teaching it, but they're actually trying to learn something, are trying to make sure it all makes sense. Not in the way that they're being taught it, but make sure it makes sense to you. And sometimes that means that you're going to encounter something that you feel like you need to intervene with, that you need to get into it. Like sometimes there's a mistake on the page and you think actually it should have been another way. And you go into the manuscripts, go into the archives, and finally you're able to see that no, actually there was something wrong happened on it, and I can correct it. So what's new about that is not just an understanding, but it's really about being a partner in the product, in the process, in the production of knowledge. Even more, right, even more than like your co-student. Students want to achieve and to progress. And I think the passion here is really what's key. It's a healthy learning environment if, first of all, exactly what every participant has to offer is being encouraged. And to not realize that, like, to see the youth, right, young students or whatever, as just being inexperienced misses that, sure, but that also means that they have fresh perspectives, and they also have energy and passion and Sitzfleisch, right, the ability to really just, like, do something for a long period of time without break, that will achieve incredible things. And then, last but not least, that the teacher realizes that it's not just that they're bestowing something to the grateful students who are serving them, but that the teacher is always a student. The teacher is learning always, or else their Torah is ossified, fossilized. What do they have to teach if they're not learning? How could they teach someone they don't fundamentally respect? I wanted to provide the original source from this. I think we can put it together. Rabbi Chanina says, Harbe lamadati me rabosai. I've learned a lot from my teachers. It's not like you've learned nothing. I've learned a lot. Me chavirai yoser me rabosai. But from my friends, I've learned even more than my teachers. Umi talmidai yoser me kulan. And from my students, I've learned more than I've learned from anyone else. The I saw that actually gets to sign off. He will rue the day he missed this, because I'm quoting his favorite, the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai has a commentary on the Talmud called the Ben Yehuda, and he comments on this passage. He says this. He says, "V'nireh l'chach kol chacham nikra b'shem talmid chacham." Right? What's the traditional rabbinic, way to refer to a rabbi, or to a Torah scholar, rather? It's that they are a Talmid Chacham. What does it mean to be a Talmid Chacham? What does the phrase mean?
Someone who's well learned in someone who's well learned and but also has insights in studying Torah in general, all Torah.
Mm-hmm. Definitely true. But let's just get at the phrase, like the actual literal meaning of the phrase. How would you translate Talmid Chacham?
A Talmid is a student. Chacham means smart.
Good. Okay, so you translate it as a
Talmid Chacham, a student of somebody who's very smart.
Good. So here's the thing. It's ambiguous. Because is Chacham an adjective or a noun? Because if it's an adjective, you say, a Talmid Chacham means a wise disciple, i.e. a wise learner. Right? Like, they're
Right.
a wise person, a wise scholar. And like, okay, that makes sense. But a Talmid Chacham can also be a cognate, right? What's it called? A smichut.
Yeah, exactly.
That you are never not a student of somebody. A Chacham is a sage. You are a disciple of a sage. You are a disciple of a teacher. Even when you are the master, you are still called a student. You are still called a student of someone. Right? And let's not forget how that the 48 qualities of Torah learning is concluded, that you say something in the name of the one you heard it brings redemption to the world. You are always, and I was speaking before about the social webbing of Torah learning, right? That is a social act. You are always connected and indebted to those from whom you learn. You are always a Talmid Chacham. You are always a student of those who came before, of those who gave to you. And then you...
And I've noticed over the years that even, many graduates of YU from more my generation will still talk about Rav Soloveitchik, and we'll take his name in mentioning what they learned from my rep, and it's a beautiful thing, like to see, because it's like, I'm learning from this rabbi, but this rabbi learned from the great Rabbi Soloveitchik, and it's like, I think it's wonderful to always give the respect to the rabbi who taught you a lot. So, it goes down by generations.
Yeah, it's a relationship that never ends in a way, because, actually, as Rav Soloveitchik described in one of his essays, even when he's studying on his own, right, he opens a folio of Gemara, and he's communing with the sages, the Amoraim, the Tanaim, and then he has a conversation with Rashi, and has a conversation with the Tosfos, a conversation with the Ramban, et cetera, et cetera. Right, that all of our learning is always in some way in dialogue with those we're learning from. There's not this notion, there's never this notion, I think, in Jewish learning that we're just deriving things from first principles, right? Just kind of crafting or cultivating, true statements or what have you. As we've seen before, truth is important, but more to the point actually is meaning. And, in this way, then, learning is always connected to someone else, to something else, right? Most Jewish books are commentaries, right? We're always in some way building on top of that which we've received. And that's really key, I think, to what that kind of creativity model looks like. It's not one in which we're just on our own, but rather we are always in some way in connection and in dialogue with that or those with whom we are engaged. And there's that, again, I think one thing when we talk about cultivating a practice of gratitude, it's not just, it's because the fundamental fact of what it means to be learning is that we owe something. That we're so grateful that someone shared that with us. So the Ben Ish Chai says, "Nireh li lechach kol chacham nikra b'shem talmid chacham," and accordingly, he said, this is why all sages are called disciples of sages. L'rmoz ikar shleimut chachmato hu mikoach hatalmid, but he flips it around. He says it's not just saying that we're always connected to those who taught us, but rather that the essence and the fullness of one's wisdom is from the power of what it means to be a student. Now, I think either he means that you are a student of someone, but I think he also means that the dynamic flips the other way too, like we were saying about Pilpula Talmudam. That Yotzer Mikulam Mitalmidai, says Rabbi Chanina. That you're called Talmid Chacham because it's your Talmidim who will be Chachamim. Because you are gaining wisdom from your students, because they are gaining wisdom from you. To be truly wise means to always be a student. Because you are either learning from someone else, or in your teaching, you are a student of your students. ולפי זה הלימוד יהיה על ידי שלושה, שהם רב חבר תלמיד. and accordingly says one's learning will be composed of these three features: Rav, Chaver, and Talmid. Rabbi, teacher, master. Friend, peer, colleague, comrade. Talmid, student, disciple, lifelong learner. On one hand, right, when we looked at this passage already, it was that these are three different characters. There's the master, there's the the cohort of students, and then there's the student in the teacher-student relationship. But here, the Ben Ish Chai is saying they're all the same person. They're you. What does it mean to be learning? It means that you are always, in some way, a teacher, a colleague, and a student. You're activating and accessing all of those different dynamics in your life. Everyone is. A teacher teaches his students, that's pretty obvious, but has colleagues that they learn from, that they ask questions from, that they have chavrusas with, that they have professional development with. And then is a disciple, whether from their teachers, when they have questions that they can't crack, from their peers, when their peers share an insight that they've never heard before, or from their students, when they learn something from their student that they could never have imagined from their own perspective. You're always those three, maybe even sometimes in the same moment. It's not a role as much as it's an aspect of oneself. They're all inside of us. He says, and this is hinted at by the rabbinic comment on the passage, Charut ala luchot, engraved on the tablets. Right, otiot hamivate, right, and the letters of the word charut, because it's without a vav, are chet resh taf, and chet resh taf is chaver, rav, and talmid. It's a Rashi Tevos, it's an acronym. Charut ala luchot, the 10 Commandments, right, God, which were inscribed by God, are made of us. Torah is made of us because charut ala luchot. These three dynamics, teaching, engaging, learning, are what it means to be Torah, or what Torah is made out of. Torah is embodied, manifest, practiced, applied through relations. Whether you're teaching, whether you're engaging, or whether you're learning, Torah is nothing more and nothing less than that. Torah is not a body of knowledge, a theoretical corpus. Torah is a lifelong practice of engaging with others, giving forth what you have, digging into what they suggest, and learning from what they offer. Always. V'chut hamishulash lo b'mihera yinatek. And he quotes Koheles and says, a threefold cord is not quickly snapped. I.e., Torah is most healthy, most robust, most strong when we realize that it's not just plug and chug information, or it's not just opening your gullet and letting someone just fill it, that it is an active relationship in which you are always fulfilling or activating different aspects of what it means to be in it. Whether you're the one giving something over, you're the one struggling equally with somebody, or you're the one learning from somebody. To have the strongest Torah possible means that you're always present and actively engaged. How could the student be missing? The student is the whole point. And we mentioned before that, the potential of that kind of that tight and close and powerful relationship between student and teacher is only possible when the teacher realizes and remembers that they are no less and no more than and no different than their student, because they too are student, and the student is teacher, and in that way they are peers. The Ben Ish Chai goes on to say, to gesture to what's called the threefold Torah, so Oraita Tlita, which is a phrase from the Zohar. And the Zohar, I think very playfully is playing with Trinity, three images, like threefold, this, that, and the other way, kind of poking at a certain other religion. But the threefold Torah is between us, God, and Torah. That Kuchabrichu Yisrael Oraita Chadhi, it says in the Tikkunei Zohar. God, Israel, and Torah are all one. We are always teacher, student, and peer. God's relationship to us through Torah is that one in which God is teaching us, one in which we are struggling with Torah, engaging with Torah, figuring out what Torah means, and one even when we are teaching Torah that's never been heard before. Yisrael is our place in that relationship is equal to that which we are learning and the one who teaches us always. So that is the part one of what it means, I think, to start crafting what the path forward looks like. That the classes that we do, what I've been blessed and privileged to be able to offer, I hope is in a way just the first stone towards, and hopefully an encouragement towards, your self-empowerment and owning what it is that you can contribute through your own chavrusas, calls on the phone with other students, finding someone to sit down with and text, and even the Torah that you want to teach. And whether that's literally a class you want to teach one day, or just to realize that, and I think this is what we're getting into next week, all of our interpersonal relationships have these moments in them too. That we should always be attuning ourselves towards opportunities we have to learn from others, opportunities we have to collaborate with others, and even when the moment is right, when teaching is something that we can offer as well. If you're interested in these kinds of dynamics, there's actually a fantastic couple of books, which I recommend, by a scholar named Eli Holzer. One called A Philosophy of Chavruta, which is actually like a pedagogical book about actually how to craft classrooms that are based in dyad learning and peer learning. And then another book called Attuned to Learning, which is like a companion volume about what these kind of learning interactions and learning relations look like. Happy to provide links to anyone who wants. Last but not least, we'll be continuing our learning with the Parsha Chat. The author is Eli Holzer, Holzer, Z-E-R. The Parsha Chat will be this Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. And we'll be having Shabbos davening at Shul, 7 p.m. also on Friday night, and 9:30 in the morning, Shabbos morning. And our concluding session of Pirkei Avos will be this coming Monday evening. I hope you can join. We'll be looking at Pirkei Avos, Chapter 1, Mishnah Vav, Mishnah 6, if you want to look at it, in which we are asked to make for ourselves a teacher and acquire for ourselves a friend. So we'll be looking at the ways in which we're able to not just stumble into these relationships, but actively seek them out and where the opportunities are in our lives in which we can craft them. So I hope you can join for that. It's been an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure. And I hope everyone has a great week.